The 1979 Daytona 500 was one of your first working the event. How important was that race and broadcast for NASCAR?
Well, from the radio side, we had been doing the Daytona 500 since 1970 when Ken formed Motor Racing Network with Roger Bear. And the main thing that drove the formation of the radio network was Bill France Sr.'s youngest son, Jim, who runs the sport now, was in Southeast Asia in the military. And if we had a network, Armed Forces Radio would cover it, the 500, and that was the start of that. But 79 for CBS coming and doing the Daytona 500 was pretty unbelievable. Only once before had a stock car race been carried on network TV live, flag to flag. ABC did it at a short track in South Carolina in the early 1970s. Ken Squire was the pit announcer for that at NASCAR's behest. And it wasn't good. You know, Bobby Isaac finished the race, the only car on the lead lap. It really wasn't competitive. There were a bunch of cars bouncing off the wall and that sort of thing, but it was an experiment that was not repeated for nearly a decade. And then in 1978, Squire convinced Neil Pilson, his boss at CBS, to sit down with Bill France Jr., who was running NASCAR, and see what kind of deal they could do to put the 500 on network TV. And it really was the perfect storm. All of the East Coast was blanketed in snow that day. People couldn't get out of their houses. Well, what's on TV? Here's cars going fast, on this big track. Let's watch this. And the ratings were good. And at the finish, where the ratings are almost always the best in a NASCAR race, they had a great battle for the lead that came down to Donnie Allison and Cale Yarborough. They crashed on the last lap. And did you know that not only was Ken Squire the motorsports editor and voice of CBS Sports for auto racing, he was also their voice of boxing. So Ken just shifted gears when Donnie and Cale and Bobby Allison got out of their cars, and there's a fight, and went into boxing commentary. And it was just the darndest thing. The ratings were great. The sport took off from there. Cale, Donnie, and Bobby each got fined $5,000 for the fight. Bobby is livid to this day that NASCAR never refunded that fine money, yet they've shown the clips of that finish and the fight over and over and over again all these years since.
What were your what are your memories of broadcasting that race?
I was on a scaffold in turn 2. Now, at that time, we did not have wireless communication, was not perfected to the degree it is now, nowhere close. So we had to use pairs of phone lines to connect our headset and amplifier to the announce booth. It was all wired. Even our pit reporter would work up and down a section of pit road, but he'd be tethered to a terminal. We just didn't have reliable wireless communication. So I'm on a 6-story scaffold, and climbing that scaffold was about the hardest thing I ever had to do. First off, the AT&T people had left our connection board, which was pretty good size, with equipment, at the base of the scaffold. So I had to get that on my back, along with my notebook and microphone and amplifier, and I had to climb a 6-story open scaffold, which is something I never, ever wanted to do before or since. And I got halfway up, and I said, I could probably do okay from right here. And then it was like, what if I miss something? What if a car is behind a camper in the infield and I miss it, spinning or coming to a stop? So I got up to the top. That was the shakiest scaffold in history, I think, but got the job done. So last lap, the car's going down the back straightaway, and I'm turning. I'm watching Cale and Donnie off in the distance, and Gary Gerald, the great Sacramento Kings announcer, was the turn announcer in turn 3. And he goes, oh my God, they're crashing and sliding and slamming. And I'm watching this all unfold, and they slide up and they hit the banking, they come back down. And Gerald finishes his commentary. And in the tower with Barney Hall, Jack Arute goes, we'll have a new leader. They're in turn 2 in front of Mike Joy. And I go, yeah. It's Richard Petty. You can hear it in my voice because I was as shocked as anybody. I knew Petty was 3rd, Waltrip was 4th, and AJ Foyt was 5th. But I didn't know how close they were or whether there was a chance for a pass. I was watching, along with the rest of America, what had happened up at turn number 3. So it was Richard. Darrell's car was on 7 cylinders. And a footnote to that finish, A.J. Foyt, his spotter that day was Paul Page from ABC, because Page was in town to call the IROC race for ABC, the International Race of Champions, Friday. And Foyt, who only ran a few NASCAR races then, said, hey, I don't have a spotter for the 500. Why don't you come and spot for me? So Page is spotting, and with 10 laps to go, Foyt says, this thing is pushing like a dump truck. He says, we got a chance to win this thing? And Page says, no, Cale and Donnie, they're a straightaway ahead. You'll never catch them. Foyt says, okay, I'm just going to ride this out because 5th doesn't pay that much less than 3rd. So there went AJ's chance to win his second 500, and he finished 3rd. But yeah, it was a day that, coming out of that race, everybody knew that stock car racing had been taken to a new level by CBS.